Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. But first up, an important announcement. There is a lot happening in Afghanistan which has an impact on the world as well as on India. And the civil services aspirants are often confused as to what to read and skip when it comes to newspaper articles related to Afghanistan, because newspapers are flooded with news articles coming from Afghanistan, and it is going to remain the same for a long time now. So what do we do to make the things simpler for you? This Friday, 8 o'clock, in our explained session, we will have a live session on what is happening in Afghanistan. We will have a live session on the return of Taliban in Afghanistan. So wait for that live lecture. Till then, don't read anything when it comes to Afghanistan. So let's get started and look at a newspaper article on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu, relevant for GS paper 2. Government dismisses snooping charges. Pegasus, a spyware which is manufactured by an Israeli firm, NSO, it is in the news for a long time now. Various newspaper reports allege that this spyware has been used to target journalists in India, opposition leaders in India, members of the judiciary, members of the election commission. That is why there is a lot of controversy. A petition has been filed in the Supreme Court calling for an independent, fair investigation into these snooping allegations. A notice has been issued to the central government. We'll have to wait and watch what exactly the Supreme Court rules on this matter. Because NSO, which is the manufacturer of this spyware Pegasus, it has clarified that it sells this spyware only to vetted governments, only to the governments, so that these governments can use this spyware against terrorists, so that terror activities, terror crimes can be prevented. So if Pegasus is used only by the vetted governments to snoop on some terrorist, for example, does that mean the government of India has used Pegasus spyware to target opposition leaders, to snoop on the judges and the members of the election commission? That is why there is this controversy. But let's try and understand in this session some of the basics related to this newspaper article. What is the difference between surveillance and hacking? Hacking is unauthorized access, or should we say unauthorized remote access. Let's say, for example, this is my device. It can be a computer device, it can be a laptop, it can be a smartphone. Somebody gets an unauthorized access to this device. How? Let's say, for example, a link has been sent to my Gmail or an SMS has been sent. I click on this link and ultimately what happens? A spyware is installed on my device. And when this spyware is installed on my device, somebody gets remote unauthorized access to my device. And he or she can use this device the way I'm using it, which means without my permission, microphone can be turned on, camera can be turned on, mails can be read, mails can be sent. This not only violates my right to privacy, which is a fundamental right, but it also is detrimental to my security, to my liberty. How? Let's say, for example, this is my device. When a spyware is installed on my device, somebody gets remote unauthorized access to my device. What he can also do, he can create a folder, and within this folder, he can create a document as well without me knowing anything related to this. Now, this document may be controversial. Let's say, for example, this document is saying, how can we assassinate a popular political leader? How can we carry out a terror attack on an important prominent location? Now, I have no idea about this document. I have no idea that a folder has been created on my computer device. But if the police knocks at my door, arrests me, and then my device is also confiscated, now a forensic analysis is done, and ultimately what comes out? That on my device, I have created a document, and in this document, there is something very controversial. I am calling for waging war against this country. I'm calling for assassination of political leaders. And this document can become an evidence against me, and I can also be prosecuted. That is why it is very dangerous. And what makes Pegasus even more dangerous is its zero-click exploit. That means no link is sent on my Gmail, no SMS is sent, I'm not clicking on any link. Even then, this Pegasus spyware is installed on my device and somebody gets unauthorized access, remote access to my device, and can misuse it, manipulate the content that is available on my device. That is one of the exciting features of Pegasus, zero-click exploit. Even without clicking anything, spyware Pegasus can be installed on your device. This is hacking, and hacking is illegal in India. Hacking is illegal, but surveillance is legal. What is surveillance? Surveillance is basically monitoring. Monitoring, for example, you go to a shop, a jewelry shop. There are CCTV cameras. What are these CCTV cameras meant for? Monitoring, so that a thief cannot snatch away some of these expensive jewelries in this shop. So that is surveillance. Surveillance through CCTV cameras. Surveillance can also be, for example, my phone calls have been monitored. Nobody is hacking my phone, but the person I'm calling, the calls that I'm receiving, somebody is in a position to hear what am I saying, what I have been communicated. That means somebody is monitoring my phone communication. Somebody is monitoring the emails that I send, because it's all connected to the internet. When the packets of data are sent by my electronic device to some other person's electronic device, in the process of the transmission, somebody can eavesdrop. Somebody can listen to these communications. That is what we call surveillance. And surveillance is legal in India. It is possible in India because of two laws. One is the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, and then we have the IT Act of 2000. Indian Telegraph Act of 1885 basically talks about telephone tapping. So the central government can authorize telephone tapping under Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. Why? If it is in the interest of public safety. Phone tapping in case of public emergency as well. For example, I'm a potential terrorist. The government should be empowered to tap my phones so that ultimately the government can prevent a terror strike. The government can prevent a terrorist activity. So in the interest of public safety or during public emergency, Indian Telegraph Act, it authorizes the phone tapping. But IT Act of 2000 is more broad. It allows surveillance of all electronic communication. Which means, what is the difference? Indian Telegraph Act of 1885 only allows the government to tap the phones. But Information Technology Act of the year 2000, it empowers, allows surveillance of all electronic communication, which can be my WhatsApp communication, which can be the emails that I send, which can be any packets of data that I send via the internet. It is this Information Technology Act of 2000 which some people say has the potential for misuse. Why? Because Indian Telegraph Act empowers or allows surveillance, phone tapping in the interest of public safety or during public emergency. But Information Technology Act of 2000, it allows surveillance, it allows interception of data even for investigation of an offense. This offense can be a big offense, for example, waging war against the country, or it can be a minor offense as well. For any kind of offense, whether major or minor, you can be put under surveillance. That is why some say Information Technology Act of 2000, it allows surveillance at a massive level. What makes Pegasus even more dangerous is that it is surveillance through hacking. That means you are put under surveillance, not an ordinary surveillance, but your phone, your computer device is also hacked through this Pegasus spyware. So if Pegasus was allowed by the government of India, according to these reports, as alleged in these reports, then the authority to do this should have come from the government of India. And who in government of India authorized this surveillance through hacking? That is why there is a petition in the court which is calling for a fair, independent probe into these allegations. And this is where we encounter Michel Foucault, a French philosopher. His primary interest was in analyzing power, knowledge, and discipline. Through this snooping or through this surveillance, what is the attacker wanting? He wants knowledge. He wants information about political leaders, opposition leaders, or some other activists. And Michel Foucault says knowledge is an inseparable twin of power. So much so that one doesn't exist without the other. Michel Foucault says that if this is a building, if this is a multi-story building, at the base of it is the knowledge. More knowledge that you have about an individual, more power you are able to exercise upon that individual. So if anybody wants to exercise any power over you, then that person must have some basic knowledge information about you. The deeper the knowledge, the more effective the power is applied. So to understand this Pegasus spyware, first we need to understand that surveillance is allowed. It is legal in India according to the two laws, but hacking is not allowed. And if you are a political science and international relations student, you should be focusing more on the philosophy of Michel Foucault. That is why there is an urgent need for reforms in our surveillance mechanism. And what are these reforms? One, only judiciary should be allowed, should be the competent authority to decide whether somebody should be put on surveillance or not. And two, we need a very strong data protection law. And this data protection law should be based on the recommendations of the B.N. Sirikrishna Committee. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another newspaper article on page number 10 of today's The Hindu newspaper, relevant for GS paper 2. There is a fresh standoff between the legislature and the judiciary. How? Tribunal Reforms Act has been passed by the Parliament, and what this Tribunal Reforms Act basically does, it has abolished few tribunals in India, and it also has provisions relating to tenure, the term, the age criteria, and selection committee for these tribunal appointments. These provisions were earlier brought in through an ordinance, and we will discuss that ordinance. But in July this year, the Supreme Court struck down this ordinance as unconstitutional. And the case was Madras Bar Association versus Union of India. The Supreme Court said that this ordinance is unconstitutional because it violates independence of judiciary. But similar provisions, which were struck down by the Supreme Court in July through an ordinance, in this case, the very same provisions have been brought again by this Tribunal Reforms Act. Now the Chief Justice of India is asking for details. What was the need to bring in this law? And this law has been passed without any proper debate in the Parliament. And this law, it has the same provisions as the provisions were there in the ordinance. And this ordinance was struck down. However, these provisions have now reappeared in this act. So this is one thing that this act talks about. It talks about the provisions related to the tenure, to the age criteria and selection committee for these tribunal appointments. And at the same time, some tribunals have been abolished. Which are these tribunals? For example, Film Certification Appellate Tribunal, Intellectual Property Appellate Tribunal, Appellate Board, so on and so forth. These tribunals have been abolished. I'll just give you one example. For example, we have CBFC, which is Central Board for Film Certification. When I make a movie, when I make a film, a certificate has to be issued by the CBFC. Whether this film is for universal viewing or whether this film is for only adults, those above the age of 18. What if CBFC fails to give me this certificate? I could have approached the examining committee of the CBFC so that this committee can examine my petition. If this certificate is still not given, I could have approached the revising committee of this Central Board for Film Certification. And if both the examining committee as well as the revising committee do not issue me the certificate, then what was the option available to me? I could have approached the Film Certification Appellate Tribunal. But now this tribunal has been abolished. So what I have to do? Instead, I have to approach the High Court. Initially, this Film Certification Appellate Tribunal, it would charge me only a nominal fee to hold the screening for its members, and it would pass immediate judgment. Now, as a filmmaker, I have to approach the High Court. I have to spend lakhs in hiring a good lawyer, and it will take time before the judgment comes. As a filmmaker, I'm not sure when my film is going to be released because now there is no appellate tribunal. And this tribunal was abolished even without consulting the stakeholders. So issue number one is few tribunals have been abolished even without consulting the stakeholders. And there are provisions in this law, and similar provisions were struck down by the Supreme Court very recently. So why bring in the same provisions again through this act? Now let's delve a bit deeper into this controversy. This act provides for a search cum selection committee. According to this act, the chairperson and members of the tribunals shall be appointed by the central government, but based on the recommendation of this committee. Now, who is going to be the member of this committee? Number one, the Chief Justice of India or a judge nominated by him, and that person will be the chairperson. The central government will nominate 2 secretaries. Now, the sitting or outgoing chairperson or a retired Supreme Court judge or a retired Chief Justice of a High Court, he will also be part of this committee. And then the Secretary of the Union Ministry under which the tribunal is to be constituted. For example, we are talking about CAT, Central Administrative Tribunal. We have to appoint members to CAT. The central government will appoint members to this CAT, but based on the recommendation of this selection committee. One member of the selection committee will be the Secretary of the Union Ministry under which the tribunal is to be constituted, which basically means the Secretary of Department of Personnel and Training, which is the department under which CAT is to be constituted. But the Secretary of Department of Personnel and Training will have no voting rights. Voting rights will be available with the members of this committee, and this committee will recommend to the central government regarding the appointment of various members and chairperson of a tribunal. And the central government is supposed to act upon these committees' recommendations, preferably within 3 months. This act, what it does, it provides for a 4-year tenure to the chairperson and the members. But the chairperson can remain in office till he or she attains the age of 70, but a member can remain in office for 4 years or till he or she attains the age of 67, whichever is earlier. And the minimum age requirement for the office of chairperson or a member is to be 50 years. Now, to understand this controversy in more detail, let's go back to the year 2017 when the Finance Act was passed. This Finance Act reduced the number of tribunals in the country from 26 to 19. And this act empowered the central government that you can make rules for the appointment of members and chairperson to the other tribunals. In June 2017, the central government notified these rules. And these rules were struck down by the Supreme Court in Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank 2019. The Supreme Court struck down these rules as unconstitutional, saying judicial independence has been violated. Because if these members and the chairperson are appointed by the central government, and these tribunals will be hearing the cases against the central government as well. So if members are appointed by the central government, they will obviously favor the government of the day, and ultimately judicial independence would be violated. This was the Roger Matthew judgment of 2019. Then in February 2020, the central government notified new set of rules. These rules were again challenged in Madras Bar Association versus Union of India 2020. And in November last year, the Supreme Court said that increase the term of the members of the tribunal to 5 years. You should also allow reappointment of members, and those advocates who have 10 years of experience, they should also be allowed to become the judicial members of these tribunals. And in this judgment, the court also recommended National Tribunals Commission, so that a National Tribunals Commission is to be constituted as an independent body, and this independent body will overview the functions of all the tribunals in India. So this Madras Bar Association judgment, the Supreme Court said increase the term of the members to 5 years. But what this act says, the term is 4 years. That means you are violating the judicial verdict. To overrule this judgment of 2020, the government came up with a bill in the year 2021 called Tribunals Reform Bill. But since this bill could not be passed in the parliament, this bill was promulgated as an ordinance. And this ordinance was also challenged in the Supreme Court. And then the rules were also issued in the year 2021. This ordinance, as well as these rules, they were again challenged before the Supreme Court. Another judgment, Madras Bar Association versus Union of India 2021 case. In July this year, the Supreme Court struck down the provisions of this ordinance, which said that there should be 4-year tenure for the members, and which said that there should be 50 years age as the minimum age requirement for tribunal members. Both these provisions were struck down, but both these provisions are now in the new act. That means the new act which has been passed, it too has set the minimum age limit to 40 years. It too has set the tenure of office holders to 4 years. And there is no mention of this National Tribunals Commission, whose establishment was mandated by the Supreme Court in 2020. So it means the central government has overruled the Supreme Court for the third time in 3 years through this law called Tribunals Reform Act. And that is why it is again challenged in the Supreme Court. Let's wait and watch what the Supreme Court will have to rule on this matter. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper. The first one, beating plastic pollution. If we look at plastic products and plastic waste, they are everywhere. But this is also a problem, and it is also a blessing. And I will tell you how. Can we eliminate plastics from our lives? Maybe no. Why? Just look at the COVID-19 pandemic. What is our defense against this tiny yet very dangerous virus? Masks. What is another defense? PPE kits. And all this is mostly plastic. And that too, single-use plastic. What is the single-use plastic? The central government has banned the single-use plastic from July 2022. What is the single-use plastic? For example, disposable plastics, used only once and then thrown away. For example, soda bottles, plastic bags. Rules have been issued by the central government wherein polythene bags with thickness less than 50 microns, they are already banned in India. From September 21, polythene bags with thickness under 75 microns, these will not be allowed. And from December 2022, polythene bags under 120 microns will also be banned in this country. We have Central Pollution Control Board along with State Pollution Control Boards. What they will do, they will monitor this ban. What they will do, they will identify the violations and they will impose penalties. And these penalties have already been prescribed under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. Which means, long story short, polythene bags with thickness less than 50 microns, they are already banned in this country. But from September 2021, polythene bags under 75 microns will be banned. From December 22, polythene bags under 120 microns will be banned. And the Central Pollution Control Board, along with the State Pollution Control Boards, they will together monitor this ban. They will identify the violations. They will impose the penalties suggested and prescribed by the Environment Protection Act of 1986. But then these PPE kits, these masks, these are mostly plastic, that too single-use plastic. Not just that, syringes that we use for vaccination, that is also made up of plastic. According to a recent study, this single-use plastic would generate 400 tons of waste. Why? Because this study says that in the form of discarded plastic syringes that are to be used to vaccinate 7.8 billion world population, what it will lead to? It will lead to 400 tons of plastic waste. And then what do we do? Three things. One, we can reduce plastic consumption. Or two, we can recycle the plastic waste. Or three, we can reuse, which basically means we have to manage the plastic waste in this country. Reducing plastic consumption may not happen because plastics are so deeply entrenched in our lives. Plastic is basically light, highly moldable. It's also waterproof, can be produced in any color, and at the same time, it is cheap. Then what are we left with? Recycle and reuse. This strategy of managing plastic waste by recycling it, by reusing it, this will lead to the achievement of two goals. Which are these two goals? Number one, we will reduce the entry of virgin plastic into the environment. That means new plastic into the market would be reduced. And it will also lead to the reduction of plastic waste. That means the burden on our waste dumps, where we dump our waste, landfills, where we dump our waste, or these plastic waste entering into the ocean, the burden will also reduce. That is what will happen if we are going to manage, recycle, reuse this plastic waste. If you look at Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, it has published something called Extended Producer Responsibility. According to this extended producer responsibility, it places the responsibility of product after use on the manufacturer. So if you are a manufacturer of plastic, it is your responsibility to ensure how it will be reused. This is where the plastic manufacturers, they will have to ensure that they create awareness in this country. They will provide alternatives to the consumers. Niti Aayog came up with something very good, very spectacular. Niti Aayog says, make use of 25% recycled materials in large construction projects. In your large construction projects, ensure that the 25% product material that you use should be made from the recycled materials. And most importantly, we have to go for segregation of waste. And this can happen at the source. For example, your apartment, your home, at your level, segregate the waste into liquid, into solid, so that once the waste is segregated, it becomes easy to recycle and reuse it. These plastic waste management rules, which have been issued by the central government, under which these are the things that are going to be banned very soon. These rules acknowledge the gravity, the severity of pollution caused by the plastic articles of everyday use, particularly of those plastic articles which have no utility beyond a few minutes or hours. Central Pollution Control Board says that there are 22 states in India which have in the past announced the ban on single-use plastics. But this ban has had little impact. Little impact, that means this ban has not been effectively enforced. That is why our wetlands are choking with plastic. And this plastic is transported into oceans. And once it is transported into the oceans, it leads to microplastic. What is microplastic? For example, there is a large plastic debris. Now it degrades into smaller and smaller pieces, smaller and smaller particles of less than 5 mm in length. That's what we call microplastic. Then we have something else, microbeads. This was once asked in your prelims examination. This is also a type of microplastic. And these microbeads, they are added to health and beauty products. For example, to cleansers, for example, in your toothpaste. Why these microbeads are dangerous? Because they can easily pass through water filtration systems. And they end up in oceans, they end up in our lakes. And thereby they threaten our aquatic life. And when they enter into our aquatic life, which means they're entering into our food chain as well. That is why plastic waste has to be tackled effectively, because it's going to not only impact our environment but also our health. In India, only 60% of the plastic waste is recycled. Why? Because we have not been effective in segregating the waste. Segregation is not done properly. So what this editorial basically says, rules are good, laws are awesome, then what is needed? Serious implementation of these new plastic waste rules can address the problem of waste. Now let's look at another column, the big opportunity. According to various studies, the median age in India would be 28 years by the year 2022-23. What about China? The median age is 37. What about Western Europe? The median age would be 45. What does this signify? An opportunity. What sort of opportunity? There will be more Indians in working population. Working population would be more than non-working population. And this is what we call demographic dividend. China, for example, China since the year 1979, it had one child policy rules. This was scrapped in 2016-2015. After that, China allowed 2 children. But then China in the year 2021 has announced that it will allow couples to have up to 3 children, which means China is aging. Europe is aging, Japan is aging, but not India. Why? Because majority of Indian population would be in their prime youth. They will not only be job seekers, they will be job providers as well. They will be entrepreneurs as well. And that is what is going to lead to a demographic dividend. This column basically says that according to OECD, which is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, it says equivalent of 5 years or more of per capita income would be likely lost by the end of 2021. World Bank in its another report says that there will be global recessions. Global recessions would be because of low investments, because of job losses, because of loss of school hours, because of the disintegration of the global trade and supply chains. So on one hand, OECD says 5 years or more of per capita income will be lost by the end of 2021. World Bank says we will have more and more global recessions because of variety of reasons. And there will be adverse impact on our environment as well because we are using more and more of plastic, that too non-degradable plastic. We have been increasingly using plastics as we discussed today during the pandemic, and majority of that would end up in our oceans, which will impact fisheries, which will impact tourism, according to United Nations Environment Program report. Amidst all of this, there is a silver lining for India, and that is our population. When our population is in its prime youth, which means there will be an increase in the labor force. When there is an increase in the labor force, which means more people will be working, more people will buy products. And what it will lead to? It will lead to urbanization. But Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Modi says, don't look at urbanization negatively. You look at it as a challenge, as an opportunity. Because if more and more people are working, they will buy products, which ultimately means that the purchasing power capability increases and it will lead to more demand in our domestic sector. That means within the country, there will be demand of the goods and services that we will be producing. That is why Dr. Raghuram Rajan, few years ago, he said, Make in India is a good program. But ensure it is not only made in India, it is also made for India. That means the demand of the goods and services should come from the population of this country. The world is not going to accept another manufacturing giant such as China. Taking all these factors into account, the Center for Economics and Business Research, what it predicts that the third largest economy by the year 2030 in the whole world will be India, hopefully. Deutsche Bank, it says that Indian economy will grow to $7 trillion. Currently, it is $2 trillion economy by the year 2030. And at the same time, this young population is eco-friendly. And this young population will be at the forefront of our battle against climate change. There was a survey conducted by HSBC and Prince Trust. This survey talked about future of work. And according to this survey, 85% of India's youth are interested in eco-friendly jobs or in green jobs. So our young population, more and more young population will participate in the labor market. They will create more jobs. They will consume the goods and services that are manufactured in India. And at the same time, they are eco-friendly as well. This is going to lead to a demographic dividend in India. But to ensure that we ultimately reap the benefits of this demographic dividend, we have to provide good quality education to our youth. We have to enhance their skills as well. This is where Cabinet Committee on Employment and Skill Development will have to play a very important role. Otherwise, this demographic dividend can turn into a demographic nightmare for us. That is what you need to understand from this column. There is another beautiful column, the message from the IPCC report. This Friday, we will have a session on Afghanistan and Taliban. Next Friday, after that, we will have a detailed live lecture on the IPCC report. Let's look at the practice questions. Number one, serious implementation of new plastic waste rules can address the problem of waste. Comment. Question number two, tribunals must not be seen as an extension of the executive. Justify. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great evening.